The panic didn't begin in a courtroom. It didn't begin with a lawsuit. It didn't even begin inside Buckingham Palace. According to the growing controversy surrounding Meghan Markle, the real alarm bells started ringing the moment royal legal experts began openly discussing a possibility that many people once dismissed as impossible. What if a royal title could disappear with nothing more than a signature? No judge, no jury, no dramatic legal battle, just one decision from the top. And suddenly, a story that looked like another routine royal feud started feeling a lot more dangerous. Because when a personal brand worth millions is built around royal status, every question about that status becomes a potential crisis. For months, royal commentators have been obsessing over the same image, the same screenshot, the same social media moment. Again and again, they pointed to it as proof of something bigger. But while everyone was staring at that screenshot, another story was unfolding quietly in the background. A story filled with contradictions, uncomfortable questions, and details that somehow escaped most headlines. And the deeper you look, the stranger the pattern becomes. The first clue came from a speech that seemed completely unrelated to the controversy. Meghan stood before an international audience and spoke passionately about the dangers facing children online. The message was serious. The tone was urgent. Adults, she argued, had failed an entire generation by allowing unhealthy digital environments to grow unchecked. It was a speech designed to position her as an advocate, a protector, someone speaking on behalf of vulnerable families. Then something happened. Only weeks later, reports emerged involving discussions about her own children and their online visibility. Suddenly, critics began asking questions. Why did the public message and the private reality appear so different? Was this simply another example of media distortion? Or was it part of a larger pattern where one narrative was presented publicly while another unfolded behind closed doors? Nobody seemed interested in connecting those dots. Until now. At the same time these questions were growing louder, another development quietly exploded beneath the surface. A new biography entered the conversation. Not just any biography, but one written by a man whose career has been built on investigating powerful people who absolutely did not want to be investigated. The reaction was immediate. Supporters dismissed it. Critics celebrated it. But almost nobody appeared to be reading beyond the headlines. That's where things became interesting. Because the controversy wasn't really about what people thought was inside the book, it was about what was actually inside it. And before we even get there, another question demands attention. Why does this particular biography matter more than the dozens that came before it? The answer starts with credibility. For decades, the author built a reputation by publishing unauthorized accounts about some of the most influential figures in business, politics, and public life. People with enormous resources, people with powerful legal teams, people who had every incentive to destroy claims they believed were false. Yet again and again, the books survived. That track record doesn't automatically make every claim true. Far from it. But it does mean people pay attention when new allegations appear. And the response from the Sussex camp only added fuel to the fire. The allegations were dismissed as conspiracy theories. A strong defense? Maybe, or maybe a risky one. Because history has a funny way of turning the phrase conspiracy theory into free advertising. The moment people hear those words, curiosity takes over. Suddenly, millions who never planned to investigate begin asking questions. And questions are dangerous, especially when answers remain unclear.
I think that their whole operation, which is now poorly financed because they're not earning real money anymore, is survival. They are desperate to make sure they don't go under and finding ways in which they can somehow prove still relevant. And that isn't easy because, frankly, they're not relevant other than the potential damage they can do to the royal family in Britain.
Then came the issue that transformed gossip into genuine royal intrigue. Titles, not opinions. Not headlines. Titles. Many people misunderstand how royal titles work. They imagine endless legal procedures, parliamentary debates, and complicated court battles. But legal commentators studying royal powers have suggested the situation may be much simpler than most people realize. And that's where the fear begins. Because if the authority that granted a title still possesses authority over that title, then the conversation changes completely. The focus shifts away from courtrooms and toward palaces, away from judges and toward monarchs. One signature future. One decision, one moment. That possibility alone has created enormous speculation. But perhaps the most explosive revelation isn't about titles at all. It's about a story Meghan has told for years, a story that became one of the defining chapters of her public identity, the famous dish soap letter. For years, audiences heard the inspiring tale. An 11-year-old girl sees a commercial she believes is sexist. She writes letters. She speaks up. Change follows. It's a powerful story, inspirational, memorable, perfect for speeches and interviews. And importantly, parts of it are unquestionably real. There is footage, there are records, there is evidence she participated. But critics digging deeper discovered something unexpected. Questions not about whether the letter existed, not about whether she cared, but about whether the story unfolded exactly the way it has often been presented. Researchers reportedly found evidence suggesting a broader campaign existed around the same issue. More participants, more moving pieces, more involvement from adults than many audiences originally understood. Then came an even bigger complication, her own father. Because when family members begin contradicting public narratives, things become messy very quickly. Statements attributed to him suggested the famous story may not have been quite as simple as the lone warrior version repeated over the years. And suddenly, an uncomfortable question emerged. If the origin story contains disputed details, what else deserves a second look? The answer may lie inside an agreement signed years later, an agreement that some critics now believe sits at the very center of this entire controversy. The agreement is where the entire controversy starts feeling less like random gossip and more like a trail of breadcrumbs leading somewhere bigger. Back in 2020, during the dramatic negotiations surrounding Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties, terms were reportedly established that would define how they operated outside the institution. On paper, everything seemed clear. The transition had rules, boundaries existed, expectations were understood. The royal family moved forward. Harry and Meghan moved forward. Case closed. Except critics now argue it wasn't closed at all. Look, because over the years, moments kept appearing that caused people to revisit those original terms. A title here, a reference there, a correction caught on camera, a social media post that reopened old debates. Individually, each incident seemed small, easy to dismiss, but together, they started forming a pattern that opponents found impossible to ignore. Claims involving private confrontations, alleged tensions behind palace walls, disagreements between senior royals, conversations that, if true, painted a dramatically different picture from the polished public image many people had been shown. One allegation described a confrontation involving Prince William and Meghan shortly after the royal wedding. Another claim suggested senior members of the family held deeply negative private opinions about the influence Meghan had over Harry. Now, it is important to remember these are allegations reported in a biography, not proven facts. But what made them explosive wasn't merely the content. It was the fact that they were detailed, specific, precise, and they arrived from a writer whose previous investigations had repeatedly survived intense scrutiny. Still, even those revelations weren't the most damaging development. The most damaging development may have come from outside the royal family entirely, because former colleagues can sometimes create more trouble than critics ever could. One former charity executive became central to the controversy after publicly discussing her experiences. This wasn't an anonymous source hiding behind unnamed quotes. This wasn't a tabloid rumor. This was a named individual attaching her reputation to serious criticisms involving Harry's leadership and decision-making. And suddenly, the story changed again. No longer was it simply about titles. No longer was it simply about biographies. Now it was about credibility. When people who work directly inside an organization begin speaking publicly, observers pay attention. Donors pay attention. Partners pay attention. Future collaborators pay attention. According to reports, concerns allegedly emerged that the Sussex brand itself had become controversial enough to create hesitation among some supporters and contributors. Whether those concerns were widespread or isolated remains heavily debated, but the mere existence of those conversations raised difficult questions about perception versus reality. And perception matters, especially when your public image is one of your most valuable assets.
I mean, everything is for commercial and for personal publicity. I think the Bondi Beach was gross, it was insensitive, but it showed the real Meghan. Anything to earn a dime, anything to promote herself at anyone's expense.
Fascinating thing about all of this is that actually maybe deep down Meghan realizes people don't care about her anymore, they don't engage engage with her anymore. The thing they do care about is her daughter.
Which brings us back to the issue that started this entire storm, the title. Because beneath every argument, every biography, every disagreement, every contradiction, and every public relations battle sits one unanswered question. What happens if patience inside the monarchy eventually runs out? Royal commentators have suggested that while legal interpretations differ, the monarch may possess broader authority over certain royal titles than many people realize. If that interpretation is correct, the ultimate threat isn't a courtroom battle stretching across years. It isn't a legal war fought before cameras. It's something much quieter, a decision, a signature. A moment that arrives without warning. And that's why this story continues to generate so much attention. Not because a title has already been removed, not because a decision has already been made, but because every controversy, every disputed story, every awkward contradiction, every former colleague speaking out, every biography, and every public disagreement seems to add another drop of pressure into an already overflowing container. The real mystery isn't whether critics are right or wrong. The real mystery is how many more questions can accumulate before someone with access to the full picture decides to reveal what has remained hidden. And if that day ever comes, the story everyone thinks they know may turn out to be only the beginning.